Chapter 6 Farming. The fight had been called the Battle of Manassas Junction by some newspapers. Charlie saw, but it quickly was called Bull Run by the men for the creek that ran nearby. They withdrew and set up camp in Washington, where all they did was drill and stand guard duty and wait for the Rebs to come and take the city, which most everybody said they could do with a good company of men. And Charlie went to see some sights, but it rained most of the time, so he went back to camp before his pass expired. The Rebs did not come, and replacements poured into all the units. They were issued new uniforms, heavy wool, proper blue, with black leather belting, and more important, they were finally paid after nearly 3 months. Charlie was given $33 in gold coins. It was more money than he'd ever had, more money than he'd ever seen, and he was sorely tempted to spend it all on himself. He did not think he would live much longer, not past another battle, and he thought of all the things he could get with the money. The sutler had come, and there were pies for the outrageous sum of 25 cents each, and he'd been on salt pork and beans for over a month. The thought of a pie was too much, and he spent the money for one of them, an apple pie, and sat in his tent alone and ate the whole thing with his fingers, licking the juice from the pan until it was clean. He instantly wanted another. This he bought, which he also ate alone, and with that his stomach was full at last, and the desire to spend money was gone with the fullness. He kept $4 for possible expenses and sent the rest home by registered mail with a letter to his mother. "Here is some money. I've been in a battle. I was scared some, but it's past now. I can't come home." And now he waited. They all waited. They drilled and cleaned and drilled, and were given a new army commander named McClellan that many of the men, Charlie included, held in high regard because he sat in horse well and took care to mind the conditions of his soldiers. In a little time they marched again, and some said it was to be a battle, but now they had been waiting for so long that many of them did not think there would be a battle at all. They thought they would just keep waiting and never fight again. It was, of course, a dream, a hope, and for many of them, a prayer. Charlie was not among them. He had waited for them, of course, and had settled into camp life and even marching life, but he still believed in the inevitability of battle, and most of all believed in the absolute certainty of his own death. He could not live. Many others would die with him, and many would live, but he knew one thing. He would die. In the next battle, or the one after that, he would die. But for the moment, he kept his equipment clean and in good order, and as they marched south, he found time to look at the country. There were settled farms now, more prosperous looking than the ones he'd seen from the train. There were chickens and cattle and pigs and barely ripe fruit in the trees. The Minnesota regiment already had a reputation. They were called cool under fire and well disciplined. But although they had been ordered not to forage, steal food for the population as they marched, most men ignored the order. After all, they were passing through rebel territory, and if they left the food, the dirty secessionists would just eat it. The men called it farming. Charlie farmed several chickens and helped slaughter a pig and a cow, and agreed with the men that Secesh liberation meat tasted as good as any homegrown goods. They ate fruit constantly, picked largely green from the trees, and most of the men had bowel troubles. Charlie came down with such a case of dysentery he couldn't dig toilet holes fast enough and had to go to the temporary hospital at the back of the march. This was an old-school building filled with sick men. There were some wounded soldiers as well, but he quickly learned that 4 men died of dysentery and disease for every man who died of battle wounds, and he decided not to stay. The doctor, a kind officer named Hand, gave him a shot of whiskey and some powder to mix in water, and he went back to the company and arrived there in the late afternoon as the men were preparing for action. "You're just in time," a private named Nelson told him. "We're going up to that line of trees and kick the Rebs out." Charlie studied the trees that lay 200 yards off. Nelson was a new man, had come in with a batch of replacements from Minnesota that had caught up to them in the camp around Washington. Charlie looked at him, saw the innocence, and felt his own age. Not in years. He was only 16. But in meadows. He was old in the art of crossing meadows. He wanted to tell Nelson about it, but what would be waiting when they went up to the line of trees to kick the Rebs out? He opened his mouth, started to say something, then stopped. There was too much, a world too much to say. You couldn't say it. You had to live it. You had to see it. You don't know nothing, he told Nelson. You don't know as much as a slick-eared calf. Nelson stopped working on his rifle. Well, ain't you one to talk, you on airs? I guess I know enough. I know all I'll need. Charlie began to say more, but instead just shook his head and walked away, looking for some cartridges to fill his box. It started the same way again, this third time. The officers dismounted and moved to the front with their sabers, the sergeants just to their rear screaming at the men. All right! Form on me! Line of battle here! Charlie stepped forward with the rest. He did not think of fear, did not think of what would happen, but he knew what would happen. He stepped forward in line, checked the cap on his rifle, and fixed his bayonet. And when they ordered, he started walking across the field with the rest of the men. Lord. There was no sound except for the clink of metal against metal on his shoulder straps, and Charlie heard Nelson's voice whispering next to him. Lord, there they are, right there. See them? Charlie said nothing, but Nelson was right. He, too, could see the rebel soldiers. This time, they were not behind earthworks, but were forming in ranks in front of the trees, just as the Union soldiers had done. They're going to come at us, Nelson said. They're forming to attack us. And even as he said it, the rebel soldiers began to scream and run forward at them. There was still no firing. The distance was too great, but the scream could easily be heard. It was the first time Charlie was to hear the rebel yell, and for a moment it frightened him. But everything had to be compared, and he thought of the fright of the first day, first battle, and the yell was nothing. This was not a line of earthworks, with shells coming from cannons. This was not a hidden line of fire and death. These were men, only men, no matter the yelling, and as the rebels came running toward them, the Union officer stopped the marching soldiers. Present arms! Charlie raised his rifle. Ready! Aim low. Aim at their legs. Fire! The men fired at one, and the front rank of advancing rebels went down. Reload and fire at will. Charlie bit a cartridge without taking his eyes off the rebels. They were still coming, but slower. The charge broken by the first volley, and he reloaded, fired 4 times, each time aiming low, and was reloading the 5th time when an officer to his front raised a saber. At them, men, he screamed. Give them steel! He started running at the confused Confederate line, and the Union soldiers followed, bayonets extended to the front. Where's your yell now? Charlie thought, and then realized that he was screaming it. Where's your damn yell now? The Confederates started to hold, tried to stand. They fired once at the charging Union soldiers, and out of the corner of his eye, Charlie saw men fall. But 5 smashing volleys of accurate fire had demoralized the rebels, cut their numbers at least in half, and when they saw the blue line coming at them through the powdered smoke, saw the glint of the bayonets, it was more than they could stand, and they turned and ran. Look, they're showing tail, a man next to Charlie yelled as they ran, and Charlie glanced at him, surprised. Nelson had been there, cocky Nelson. He was nowhere to be seen, and Charlie hadn't seen him get hit, hadn't seen him fall. Charlie ran on. Some men slowed, satisfied they'd won the fight, but Charlie couldn't stop running, and soon found himself in front of the line. He would have been shocked to see himself. His lips were drawn back, showing his teeth, and his face was contorted by a savage rage. He wanted to kill them. He wanted to catch them and run his bayonet through them and kill them, all of them. Stick and jab and shoot them and murder them and kill them all, each and every rebel son of them. Not one would be able to get up, not one. Kill them all, before they could kill him. He was out of himself, beside himself, an animal, and it was difficult to say how far he would have gone. Certainly he would have caught up with them, and since he was nearly alone and would have been alone when he did so, he would have been killed. But one of the sergeants stuck the butt of his rifle between Charlie's ankles and brought him down. Better hold up there, Gamecock. You can't take the whole rebel army. Besides, they don't want any more of you. Let them go. Charlie sat on the ground, still snarling, watching the retreating rebels. We have to kill them. You'll get another chance, the sergeant said, smiling. Now reform and let's get a line fixed again. He turned away and yelled at the other men. On me! Line of battle! Form line of battle! Charlie got up and reloaded his rifle. The rebels had gotten back into the trees and were firing, sniping at the Union lines, but the bullets all went high. Withdraw! The sergeant yelled. In formation! In good order! Withdraw! They moved back across the field and had gone perhaps 40 paces when Charlie saw Nelson. He was sitting on the ground, one hand holding his stomach. Charlie broke rank and went to kneel beside him. Where are you hit? He already knew the answer. Blood and other matter slid through Nelson's fingers onto the ground. Belly, Nelson said. I got me a belly wound, wouldn't you know it? First fight, and I get me a belly wound. He gasped the words. The pain was already making it hard for him to breathe, and Charlie knew the real pain hadn't truly started yet. You'll be fine, Charlie said. The ambulance will come here and get you, and you'll be back in Minnesota in no time. Don't, Nelson said through his teeth. Don't lie. They don't pick up men with belly wounds, and you know it. They'll give me some water and leave me to die. Charlie didn't say anything, but knew it was true. Stomach wounds were fatal. The surgeons could do nothing. The ambulance drivers would go through the wounded when and if they got to the field and jerk shirts up checking for stomach wounds. Those soldiers would be left. The surgeons were too busy with amputations and treatable injuries to spend time on those with stomach wounds. It was an agonizingly slow death. It might take 2 days, and the pain left men screaming until they were too hoarse to make another sound. I don't want to die like this, Nelson said, just lying here waiting for it. Charlie didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. Load my rifle, will you, Charlie? I fired it just as I was hit. Load it for me just in case the Rebs come back, will you? Charlie hesitated, then nodded and picked up Nelson's rifle, tore a cartridge off of his teeth, poured the powder down the bore, and settled the bullet on the powder. Don't forget the cap, Charlie. Seat the cap good. Charlie pinched the cap and set it on the nipple, pushing it down tightly with his thumb. He put the hammer on half-cock. Just put the rifle next to me, with the butt down by my foot. Yes, like that. Now cock the hammer, will you? Thank you. That's right, kind of you, Charlie. Just one more thing. I can't reach down to my foot, and there's a powerful itch on my right foot. Would you take my shoe off before you go so you can scratch it? Charlie unlaced the shoe and pulled it off. The foot was white, so white it looked like marble, as if it wasn't alive. Well, he thought, soon enough. I got me a letter back in my haversack, where we put them down before we formed up. Nelson said, would you see that it gets the mail back to the folks in Deerwood? And tell them, if you see them, that I died with my face to the enemy, will you? Charlie nodded and was surprised to find that he was crying. He did not think he could cry any longer, but the tears were sliding down his cheeks. Do you have water? Nelson nodded. Just take small sips, Charlie said. They say to just take small sips. Thank you for this, after I nodded back at you that way. That was nothing. Thank you anyway. It's nothing. Charlie took a breath. The sergeant was coming back across the meadow toward him. One of the rules, he knew, was that you didn't stop for the wounded. When a man went down, he was alone, even if he was your brother. You want me to stay with you? Nelson shook his head. They might be ready for another attack. Charlie stood and waved the sergeant back. Well, then, yes, you better go. Charlie nodded, but his feet didn't want to move. He had to force them, think about them moving, and with that he walked away slowly. It was strange, he thought, the crying. I didn't even rightly know him. Still don't know his first name, and here I am crying, with all these men I've seen dropped, and I don't even know him. And the sound of the shot stopped him. He stood for a moment, the tears working down his face, stood for a long moment, and then started walking again. He did not look back. Second battle.